Welcome to the Tuning In podcast, where we talk alignment, intuition, and our internal guidance system. We cover woo-woo topics in an approachable and practical way. I'm your host, Dana Evans of Alignful.com. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Tuning In podcast. I just got off the most wonderful call with a fellow inner voice facilitator named Nicole Perkins. And we had such a fun conversation. And if you're curious about inner voice work, what this looks like when you use it in the real world, then this episode is for you. Nicole has such a beautiful story where she was actually a middle school teacher up until COVID hit. And she then got certified by Just Lively to do the inner voice facilitation. And she literally just quit her teaching job at the end of the spring semester just this year and started doing inner voice coaching full time. And she was able to replace her income and really embrace a new way of living and being. And through this work, she has met so many amazing people and been able to speak to so many inner voices that she's even found people channeling, and we get to talking about that in our conversation as well. It is so much fun. If you want to check Nicole out, I highly recommend you follow her on Instagram at metaphysicalme_, and we'll put that in the show notes because she actually shares a lot of the clips of people that she does sessions with, so you can start to get a sense for what it really sounds like to listen to an inner voice. And then she has a whole library of sessions that you can listen to on her website at metaphysicalme.com. So she's so wonderful. I asked her what's one thing she wishes people could understand that they don't know about themselves, and she said that you are 100 times more powerful than you think you are. And she elaborated on that in this episode, and it's really fascinating and inspiring to hear her take on that. And bonus, we even talk a little bit about extraterrestrial living and how that comes through sometimes in inner voice sessions and what that actually means. So this is Nicole Perkins. This is our episode. She's an inner voice coach who helps people reconnect with their higher self, soul, God, source, and expand their capacity for more wisdom, love, and abundance. This is a must listen to episode. So without further ado, here's this week's episode of the Tuning In podcast, season 2. Hello and welcome to another episode, season 2 of the Tuning In podcast. And I am so grateful today to be joined by Nicole Perkins. And Nicole, well, you heard her intro at the beginning of this episode, but she and I actually met and got to know each other through the Inner Voice Facilitator training with Just Lively. And it has been, I just have to say, so amazing to watch Nicole's journey during the Inner Voice Facilitator training because she just took this stuff and freaking ran with it and has totally, at least from what I can see, totally transformed her life and built it around inner voice work and being guided by her own inner voice. So the reason I have her on the podcast today is one, we'll share this a little bit later, but she's doing some really cool stuff with even kind of beyond just inner voice with some channeled coaching. And so I want to share that with you guys, what she's up to. But also just to introduce you all to how somebody takes this work and just starts living it, right? Really getting beyond the mind and letting that inner voice guidance guide everything she's doing and then double down and use that with her work and her clients in everyday life. So I think the more that we're exposed to people doing this so beautifully, the more we see that it's not that she's special in a way that you can't be. Nicole's obviously very special, but it's not, she doesn't have something that we all don't have, it's just the willingness to let the mind step aside and let the inner voice step up. And that is accessible if you're willing to let that through. So anyway, so excited to have you, Nicole. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much. And that introduction was so beautiful. I was getting teary-eyed.
Oh, that makes me
I
happy.
appreciate that. Because, sometimes I'm just like, oh, yeah, I really did that. Like, it's still very surreal for me.
Yeah, I seriously, just looking at what you've done, and I guess we should probably share what it is that we're talking about because, Nicole, when you joined, can you paint a picture for us? When we started the Inner Voice Facilitator training, where were you at in your life? Like, what were you up to? And obviously, just so everyone else knows, this was right before or right about when COVID really started flaring up. And just, yeah, where were you at, Nicole? Like, what was going on in your life?
So I was in my 5th year of teaching middle school dance. And I was working on a certification in spiritual direction. So I knew that I wanted to work with clients one-on-one, and I knew I wanted to do spiritual work. So I remember the date, it was March 13th. And that was a Friday. We were told to basically gather up all of our stuff, all of our instruction, and get ready to move to an online platform. And so when I left, all I kept hearing and saying to myself was, "You're not going back. You're not going back." And looking back, I don't think it was all coming from me. I do think some of it was my mind and that desire to not return, but I think I was also being guided. So I immediately I was working all day to just figure out what I can do. Like I was trying different things, trying to build a course. All I knew is that I wasn't going back. And lo and behold, just dropped the certification within the next few weeks, maybe even a week after that. And I was like, this is it. This is what I'm doing. And so I just made the decision to hone in on this and just run with it because I knew I was meant to do something beyond just teaching middle school. I knew I'm supposed to be helping people in a deeper way. And interestingly, I had been doing, inner voice work. Like if you're a follower of Just Lively, I'm sure we've all dabbled in inner voice work here and there and, writing to your inner voice. So when we were doing the certification, I would ask my inner voice over and over, am I going to return to school next year? And they would say no. And we would just go back and forth. And I was like, okay, so how am I going to get money? And they would just give me reasons and answers. And I just got to the point where I was just like, I'm not going back. And so I didn't. And I think because I chose not to, that also meant that I made the decision to make whatever I could of my inner voice certification.
Wow. Yeah, that's so beautiful because what she just described, okay, what you described, Nicole, and I think a lot of us have maybe experienced that is you heard it before you knew how it was going to work. And that would be the difference between inner voices letting you know something and the mind wants to know, yeah, but how? And that is where it sounds like you trusted. And even though you didn't know the how, and even though you couldn't get that answer, which by the way, that drives me nuts, right? Our inner voice it'll just, because it knows, but it knows that we don't need to know all of it yet. And if we just follow and keep trusting, things will unfold. Well, that's very challenging for the mind. So it sounds like you followed that, you trusted, and then knowing that that's what you were doing, which was not going back, you were able to just double down, right, on what you were learning and dive into that in a way that possibly, you can tell me if this is accurate, but you possibly wouldn't have if you were expecting to go back to teaching.
Right, right. I didn't give myself an option. I really didn't.
Yeah. And look what unfolded, because now, well, before we even go there, real quick, when you were teaching, you said, you knew you were meant for something more, but when you were teaching, were you actively looking for something else to do or expecting something else to come forward before kind of that you had to move, go online?
That's a good question. I I was actively doing the spiritual direction certification to kind of prepare myself and learn. And I did a lot of self work. So I worked with my own spiritual director and I got a life coach because at one point during that year, I think it was actually January, which is 2 months before, everything went crazy. I got a life coach because I had a major breakdown and I was just like, I can't do this anymore. And so I got a life coach, and I would ask my inner voice, okay, so do I look for a different job? What does that new job look like? And I kept getting, no, you're not going to find it on like, a job search board. No, like I knew it was going to happen. I knew it was going to be being self-employed, um, working with people on a spiritual level, but I had no idea what it was going to look like. What I really learned during that time when I had the meltdown until March is that I had to sit in the discomfort. I had to sit in the discomfort and I had to learn whatever I could in the discomfort. And I knew that I couldn't leave my job feeling like that. I couldn't leave running away or trying to escape in that fleeting feeling. So my coach helped me just learn what I could in the discomfort. And then finally, the discomfort started to settle. It kind of started to go away. Once I dove into it more and it eventually went away. And I think that's where the magic really happens is we have these times in our life where it's really uncomfortable and it's calling you to not run from it, but just look at it.
I'm taking notes. That's so good. Yeah, it's calling you to look at it and not run from it. And if that is not a life lesson, then I don't know what is, because I think that a lot of us can relate to that message, and we are kind of taught and trained in a way to avoid sitting with discomfort, especially in this society where comfort is so readily available in all different aspects of our lives, that discomfort seems wrong and bad, when in fact, like you were saying, it's showing you something that you need to spend some time with before you can move forward.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So with this, I'm actually really curious, this spiritual direction training. So is that something, what was that about? And is that still something that you're doing in addition to the inner voice work, or has that transformed as well?
Spiritual direction is kind of like it's one on one, and it's kind of like so there's like pastoral counseling where it's centered around a denomination, and so spiritual direction will just be more spiritual focused. So there's no denomination, but it's sitting with people that really want to deepen their connection and really notice, um, let's say, spirit or source in their everyday life, and then talk about it with another, you could call it companion. So that's the direction I was going. And what's interesting is when I got certified, I asked my inner voice, should I continue? Because I had one more year. I had been doing the certification for 2 years. I asked my inner voice if I should continue on next year, and it said no. And I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to tell my cohort, my director that I let it go? And it turns out that my path was shifting, but also I've been able to incorporate what I learned now because now I'm doing coaching. And so spiritual direction and that training with being there for someone else and, learning about, if your audience is familiar with like the dark night of the soul, which is like a spiritual depression, it's learning how to sit with people when they go through these spiritual phases. I'm like, oh, so everything I learned now is helping me in what I'm doing. So it all just came together beautifully.
Wow. So you were 2 of 3 years in, and your inner voice said you didn't need to follow through. And what allowed you to trust that at that point? Like how, because again, I'm just looking from the mind's perspective. The mind will often say, well, you may as well just finish. You're so close. Just finish and then it's done. There's a lot of rationalization there that could seem very, well, logical, of course. So how are you able to trust that? And because you just said, I just let it go.
That's a great question. I asked my inner voice over and over. And then also, I got to a point where I was tired of following societal norms and doing what I've been told to do. So that's a large part of my story. I was a classically trained dancer, ballerina. And so a lot of that, I sigh because I'm just thinking back to, everything is about being, quote unquote perfect and body and doing this and checking the boxes. I was just like, I guess it's time now that I'm just going to break all of these societal norms down. When it came to leaving teaching, my mom wasn't even on board yet. And so I literally just said nope to everything. And I said, I guess I'm about to do a complete 180. And all I think I was just certain, my mind was made up that this had to work.
Oh my gosh, I got so many chills when you were sharing that. And it's, I think it's something that we all struggle with. And the struggle, in fact, is creating the struggle.
Right.
Because, right? It's like we fight this and fight this and fight this when, in fact, letting go, it can be the easiest in some ways thing to create what you want. You're like, if you let go of everything, you are deciding, right? Which I forget the origin of decide, but it's basically to cut off other options. And
Mm,
you funneled yourself into this truth that you were creating, that your inner voice knew was coming for you.
yeah.
How did you deal? And I just bear with me here because because you follow this guidance so well, I'm asking you all of the questions that I know minds of our listeners are going to be asking because, they're dabbling in this work, but still may not be able to quite jump in, and especially in certain aspects of their life. But how did you deal with, you said your mom wasn't even on board. How did you deal with that with like family and different relationships who may be like, Nicole, what are you doing? You have a good job. You're not using your skills that you've learned. Like, how did you manage that?
So I want to tell your audience that this was still very hard on a mental, like physical level, right? So, because I don't want it to sound like I was just up, bye. It was still, mentally difficult to follow through. So what I did with my mom, and I'm laughing because it's just funny. I literally kept telling her over and over. So I feel like what I did was like, I said it enough to where we both believed it. And so I would just tell her, hey, mom, I'm not going back. Because my mom, I come from a line of retired educators. So she's a retired principal. So I knew this was going to be a big deal. And it's kind of like I just kept prepping her and kept prepping her. And, I don't think anybody needs to do this. This is just my story because I love my mom dearly. And, at that point, I wanted her support. So I just kept prepping her. And then what happened was she saw how hard I was working. She was like, wow, Nicole is literally spending all day figuring out what she can do to not go back. And I think she saw how happy I was. And she asked herself, why don't I want Nicole to go back? And she realized it was her own personal thing. Now, when I told my grandparents, who are both retired educators, my grandfather was like, well, where are you going to work? And I was like, well, I have my room. And he was like, well, like he was so puzzled because, it's just such a generational gap. Just the thought of being self-employed. He's like, well, who's your boss? And I was like, well, granddad is going to be me. This whole like concept was so new to him. He freaked out. But then later on, when he thought about it, I think what happens is when the person you're talking to, when they can sense that you're so sure and you're okay, I think they just jump on board because, they just see the joy and the love. And I don't think you can question or, deny that.
I have the biggest smile on my face right now. That's so sweet. That is so sweet, too, of your family. And just hello, hail your mother, because for her to ask herself that question is, why is it upsetting me about Nicole's decision? Oh, what a beautiful, amazing woman.
Mhm.
And that, what you said, I think is so powerful because I'm seeing that how that can apply in so many other ways is when they can sense that you are sure and you are okay, they can jump on board. Because so often, what are we doing? We're trying to follow a path and we're trying to get others to believe in us and to buy in before we fully believe in ourselves.
Right.
And that's when it becomes so challenging because you're like, I need you to believe in me. But if we're not speaking and acting from that place of confidence and trust and knowing, then that energy is sensed. People sense energy even if they aren't actively aware of it, and then they buy into our unconscious doubt. I'm like seeing this reflected in my life right now. I'm like like Matrix. Wow. Okay. So there we go. Knowledge bombs, wisdom bombs, Nicole. Thank you. So from there, because we're kind of weaving your story in as we're like diving into all these really fun questions about how you got here. And, you said, well, this is just your experience. And that's true because each of us, the power that we each have is we can tap into our inner guidance and, find our own path to what we're wanting. But it's so invaluable to hear you share your experience because I think that it just makes things more accessible and helps others understand like how you were able to ebb and flow and find your new flow. So then what happened? So like you are now coaching and, graduated the IVFT and you just started doing this full time. Is that correct?
Yes. So my first month, I made the exact amount that I would make when I was teaching.
Oh my gosh. I love that so much.
That's when I was like, okay, all right, you're on the right path. You'll be okay.
And were you taking on like how, because what I want to know is how from when we started doing beanbag release sessions and just the traditional deep dive inner voice sessions, how has your understanding of the inner voice, how is your working with clients and your desires personally, how have those transformed over the past few months?
Oh my gosh. So, I mean, everything has changed. I learned something new from working with the inner voice every single day. And so I feel like my purpose is just, shifting. So I started with the single sessions, which are so great. Like it's such a great door opener. And then I had clients starting to return. And that's when I noticed that, okay, they're going deeper. Um, and it was just such a pull to do consistent sessions because the wisdom that was coming out was so profound and what I was learning was really profound as well. And what happened was that I started to have clients that would channel. And I'm still learning myself about what channeling is. And from what I understand, you have your inner voice. So we have that direct connection with ourselves and with source. But we also have the capability to get other streams of consciousness. And so now how I'm looking at it is, okay, I have my inner voice, my higher self, and then I can also have an elder or I can have a guide. And it's just having multiple streams of information and wisdom coming in. And basically what's been happening is I have a client who I would say is pretty advanced in her channeling capabilities. And she emailed me when I was doing single sessions out of the blue, said, "Hey, Nicole, I'm really struggling with, X, Y, and Z. I just really want to do a session." And I don't know, it was just God, source for sure, because something in me said, do a session with her. And so I did a session. We breathed for 40 minutes. And I was like, okay, we're just breathing. We're not connecting. I'm not going to judge it. Maybe this breathing is good and we're just clearing away everything that she's been going through, because she had been going through a lot. And then lo and behold, a being popped in and we were both speechless. And I think we both didn't sleep for like the next few days, because when something like that happens, it changes your reality completely. And that's when I started to learn, because we worked together more, that the beings, I'll just call them beings, actually inspired me to begin channeled coaching because I actually had a lot of resistance around the word channeling at first. And so I had to do some internal work around how I see channeling and what it is. And I had actually saw someone post like people should avoid channeling. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, what am I doing? Am I doing the right thing? And that's when I checked in with my inner voice and I was just like, okay, is channeling okay? Is it dangerous? And, they said it's completely safe. And also it's a trusting that my clients who are coming to me are safe. We're protected. There's like a space being held around us. And I'm just learning that I have been designed energetically to allow my clients to go deep enough to where they have the potential to channel.
Yes. Well, it's interesting, just like on a personal note, is that as I've been watching your stuff, I've been feeling, I told you this, but I've been feeling like the nudge to possibly do some of that work with you personally, because it, what you'll find is, or what I find rather, is as I'm evolving in my own, path to self, the type of people that I want to work with evolves as well. And I feel like there's fewer and fewer of them. Right. And so, I signed up with a coach that I'm very excited about for this quarter. And then I was seeing your work and I was feeling this nudge. And I'm like, well, that's clearly might need to be my next step, because I have felt this ability and once experienced this like channeling, and it kind of scared my mind to the point where I can sense that it kind of shuts me off a little bit if I get too deep. And I know, right? And this is the beauty, people, of working with someone who's, practiced and skilled, is that there's a mind level of trust, which means, when Nicole is holding that space, something else can kind of open and the mind can kind of chill out a little bit so that whatever needs to pour through can.
Mm-hmm.
And do you find that, I mean, when you're working with your clients, do you find like it takes a few sessions for them to open up, or like what is your experience with that now that you've kind of moved into more of that channeled coaching and channeling of coaching?
For everyone, it's different. So some people can go into it right. Okay, so I have such an array of clients. So some might not channel at all, which is great, which is fine. they are cultivating that relationship with their inner voice. And then I have some that might channel right away. And then I have a few who have like gotten into it as we've moved on throughout the series of sessions. And so with channel coaching, I didn't create it with the intention of like everybody channeling. It's just the name. And I think the being fit this honestly, it's just the name that came to me, honestly. And I was like, okay, there's something to this. And what I've been told by them is that my clients are just going to be able to do both. And I think they said all of us really have the capability to channel. It's just, do we have enough of the conditioning off to be able to allow that to come in? So I'm actually realizing that this is actually pretty normal. It's just working with our thoughts around it and the conditioning of our mind and being able to let go.
Yes. And of course, that's also with even the inner voice work, right? It's as our consciousness evolves and as our conditioning, as we're able to shed that by, just exposing ourselves. I mean, now words like manifestations are really common. Whereas even a few years ago, I feel like that wasn't really that wasn't as popular, at least in like, certainly in like the business world or in more traditional jargon. You didn't hear it as much, except for the people who are way out there. And so the more we're talking about this stuff and the more others are exposed to it in a way to see like, this is safe, this is beautiful, and it's just another experience, like you had mentioned, like it's another experience of reality, and things can shift and we can evolve if we're willing to let go. I saw someone posted the other day in a group that I'm in, and she was talking about her mantras, and she said, I have to let go to grow. And she was speaking specifically for like her business, right? She was trying to grow her business, but if that does not apply to everything, I mean, any growth, any expansion we desire also requires us to shed a layer, to shed an expectation, just shed, a thought pattern around what it means to do something or who you are, right? We have to be willing to have a level of letting go so that we can grow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And with that comes trust, like what you spoke about. So obviously you're very involved with this. What about the people close to you in your life? I mean, you've kind of spoken about your grandparents and your mom. Are they into this work? Like, are they seeing you do it and getting curious? Have you done work with them? Because that's always something too I'm curious about, is like how your circle evolves as you do.
So I'm in a relationship. My boyfriend is like totally on board. He like listens to the sessions with me. So that's nice. My father, he actually kind of tied in his religious views, like Christianity, and apparently um, extraterrestrials have been a part of like Christian history. I'm not like super familiar, but he was like, well, we got here somehow. So he's kind of like open to it. Now, my mom has definitely, like, my whole spiritual development has taken some time to like come on board. So, like, even I have a memory, oh gosh, this might be like 2013, 14. I was into tarot heavy and she did not understand it. She was like, no, 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 no. And then lo and behold, a little later, she ends up letting me do a tarot reading. So she's like kind of slowly coming on board, and I've let her listen to a few things, and she'll if it resonates, she'll be with it, and then sometimes she's like, okay, I gotta digest it. I have to digest. Now, as far as my friends, I honestly don't talk to any of them about it. I think I've talked to one, but interestingly, um, my best friend, the day that my client channels, me and my friend actually kind of fell out. And I realized And I asked my inner voice over and over. I said, do we need to take space? And I kept getting a yes. And it was one of the hardest decisions I've had to make. And this kind of goes back to how you were saying, you'll notice that the circle gets smaller and smaller. And I've talked to a lot of mentors about this, like, do you start to have friends that just aren't on that same like frequency? And they just said yes. And it's just so ironic to me that right when my client started channeling, it's almost like the universe said, okay, it, I'm still like processing it. But I don't think that's a coincidence. I definitely think it was supposed to happen that way. So the people I talk to right now about channeling are, my audience, like my Instagram followers, anyone who's open. But as far as my day-to-day life, not really.
Yeah, I get that. Thank you for sharing all of that. And I agree. I mean, it's inevitable in a way. I mean, we don't necessarily have, even you look at like your friends from, each grade that you move into in regular school, right? You have your elementary school friends, and then you go to high school and you lose some of those friends. And then, you go to college and you lose some of those friends, and then you get into your career and you lose some of the, so it's like, it is this evolution. But I think sometimes we forget that just because we're out of college and we're living our lives with a group of friends, it doesn't mean they're forever, right? Each person has a purpose and a role in our lives. And I know, I've experienced it for sure as well, where there's this desire to hold on, a fear of what it means to lose that relationship. But it's also, if we want to grow, sometimes there's a letting go in that area of our lives too. And it can be painful and confusing, I know, for the mind, as I've experienced this as well. And then also, it's like sometimes when you leave a job that wasn't serving you, it's almost like a slingshot where when you let go of that, you have a quantum leap in your own growth as well.
Mm-hmm.
Which sounds like, yeah, right, when the channeling, it's an interesting conversation. Again, just thinking of, I've been lucky in that I have a pretty strong group of people where I do talk to this about, but there's also a lot of people where I just don't really go there because I'm like, it's not worth it. If anything, they want to know that what I'm doing, like you, it's like, well, they can find out about it through the podcast, through Instagram, through joining my membership. It's like, it's not that it's hidden, but it's just not necessarily, I don't spend my time having those conversations with everybody either.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree.
Which is why I love to have conversations with people like you, Nicole, because you get to really express yourself. And I'm like, tell me more, tell me how you've, evolved this, because it is amazing. It is empowering. And it is such a beautiful representation of using this guidance in your life. And may I ask you, because if I do recall, so everyone, you have to follow Nicole on Instagram, like you must, because she posts a lot of, so she's doing sessions all the time with people, and she posts a lot of clips of these sessions. And if you want to get more exposure to this stuff, like, you got to follow her sessions, because it's like my brain's explodes like every day. So it's and we'll put the link in the show notes, but it's metaphysicalme_
Yes.
on Instagram, right?
Yes. And also I have the Inner Voice library. So I have like full sessions.
Oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm.
Is that on your website?
Yes.
Okay, so her website's metaphysicalme.com. So first, just like as a like plug that in real quick, you got to go follow her. You have a ton of that stuff on there, and so it's really fun to, follow you and see what you're doing and how you're working with people. And now I've got my thought back. So I do believe on Instagram, you posted at one point that you used your inner voice or you do use your inner voice to determine like your skincare routine during the day. And your skin is so beautiful. Every time I'm like, oh, her skin's so glowy. And so will you share a little bit about that? Cause I'm like I love skincare. Um, and so I think that's a fun way to, again, guys, it's not all like we're channeling and we're like moving into alternate universes and evolving and leaving people behind. But it's also like fun things in everyday. I mean, it's all fun, but it can be all fun, but it's also how do you use this in everyday life? And I'd love to hear just you share a bit more about your experience in like your day-to-day life and your inner voice.
Yes, and I love that because it doesn't have to be all serious all the time. So, you know how you have people that are intuitive eaters and they're really good at eating on what their body needs. I I wish that was me. And that's something I'm still working on. But I transferred that over to skincare. And so when I get out the shower, I look at my my setup and all my options and I basically just say inner voice, what are we feeling like we need tonight? And then I put the combination together. And it started off as like just playing around and it became like really, really easy to do, and just really fun. And so that's just a fun way I talk to my inner voice. But in my day to day, I still practice with the foods. That's something I want to get really, really good at. And right now, so I'm learning there's levels, and maybe you've experienced this before, or phases. So right now, I'm in a place where I don't have to ask too much. I can just kind of do what feels good and do what feels good and just kind of follow those nudges. um, if I get stuck on something, that's when I'll ask my inner voice a question. And those questions tend to be a little bit more serious. But yeah, that's kind of like the day to day. I have my sessions and I'll just really follow what feels good, which is like, the alignment work. I still feel like that's attached to inner voice and it's still following your intuition. You're just not stopping, in that moment to ask an actual question like inner voice, should I do A or B? You're just kind of going with, okay, this feels good.
Yep. That's, and that it's funny because my mind actually judges me around this topic because I feel very much that for the most part, at least the things that I don't have a big attachment to, I follow the nudges and I just kind of do whatever's next. So it's not like a very direct experience of I'm asking, but it's more I'm feeling through my day-to-day life. But then my mind tends to have the judgment of, well, you're not doing it really well because you're not in constant active conversation with your inner voice. And isn't that funny?
That is funny.
I'm like, thank you, but I'm so aware of it. And because I'll feel like that sense of, oh my gosh, I'm teaching this work. I talk about this all the time. And here I'm not living it. When in fact, that's more of a judgment of the mind. So I love it. Honestly, you're reinforcing me when you say that you kind of follow the flow and alignment of those nudges and that you feel that connection, even if you're not directly doing the Q&A.
Yeah, because and you might feel this way too, but I feel like once you've really dug deep into yourself and done a lot of that work, it becomes a bigger part of your reality. And that's why a part of the reasons why I started channel coaching is because I kind of wanted to accelerate people into that process to where the inner voice, your intuition becomes a larger part of your reality. That way, it's just easier to kind of just do what feels good and things just get better. Like it's still hard. Like I'm going to have days too where I ebb and flow, but, um, there's more magic, more beauty, more ease, more allowing. It's just easier to just follow the nudges.
Yeah. Oh, and that gave me some chills too, because it does. I mean, do we not all want more ease, more magic, and more allowing? I mean, if that's not a sell for doing this work, it's just, and there's more ease. Now, what do you do? So you said you're playing with this more with food. What areas do you feel there's more resistance that your mind doesn't allow your inner guidance as much, if any?
Food, for sure. I don't know what it is about food. I'm assuming I probably have a lot of child story, because, with allergies and, being lactose intolerant, a lot of being told to me by parents, grandparents, "Oh, you probably can't eat that." So I'm sure it's just, like, a lot of conditioning. I've just unconditioned so many things, and I haven't spent time unconditioning myself in the area of food.
And then when you've done more of that, yeah, the deconditioning, the unconditioning in other areas, what was your approach to doing that? Like, how did you work on that?
Oh my
Work
gosh,
through it?
what have I not done? Let's see, hypnotherapy, a lot of past life regression. There's this technique called Tappet's acupuncture therapy, which is basically like it's like a mix of tapping and pressing acupuncture points.
Ooh.
Um, I did ayahuasca, but I definitely won't do that again. Um, oh gosh, just tons of meditation, just reprogramming the subconscious. A lot of
I love that. Yes. And just like, hey, people, there's tons of ways, right? There's so much
right,
we can do.
right,
We have so much access these days to just, if here's the deal. This is how I feel. If you're feeling stuck and you feel like your inner voice is not, you're not able to get to it, there may be a layer to handle first before your mind lets your inner voice come through. And that, like Nicole just, I love what you just said. Like, you just listed a ton of different ways that people can explore and start to me, I have this picture of like we're holding on to a rope and we're afraid to go down or up. But like each of those ways, whether you do a meditation or you do, tapping or acupuncture or, subconscious work, past life regression, any of these things, each of them is helping you release the grip a little bit. And the more you release the grip, the more you're creating space between your hand and the rope where the inner voice can kind of flow through and come through to help guide you. But as with everything, this is not all or nothing. You're not either good at inner voice work or not.
right. Everyone can do inner voice work for sure.
Yeah. And like we were talking about with the nudges is, just because you don't exactly hear a voice right away, it may still be guiding you in other ways. And it may guide you furthermore to do one of these other types. Like I have there's like my inner voice is like not needed when I ask about like ayahuasca. And I'm like, cool. Not needed. Like, and so I can just ask and check in with different areas at different times to see, is this for me? Right? Is this for me right now in this moment? And you can kind of get that information so you can decide, even, right? Do I need an inner voice session? Right? You can ask your inner voice.
Yeah, it's great what we can do with our inner voices.
Yeah. I just yeah, you're such a good example for all of that because we all have the areas, and I think that's another thing to remember is it's an evolution. It's not like you start the work and then everything is magically fixed as if there's a fixing to be done. But it's part of the process and the training, the deconditioning, and yeah, the evolution.
Yeah, there's so many layers. There's always something.
So you said that you said if there's something that you could magically get people to understand, one thing, it would be that you are 100 times more powerful than you think you are. Can you elaborate on that like a little bit? Because just that idea of our own personal power in, all the different fields of our lives, how do you see that?
Oh my gosh. So, and I'm still learning this. However, when you go into your inner voice, you feel the depth and the realness and the trueness and the essence of who you truly are. And I'm learning that we are powerful creatures. Um, and we were designed in the eye of the creator, and we are co-creators. And I don't think we truly understand that we are creators and that we can hone in on our power and just make things happen, and create what we want to create and heal what we want to heal and grow. And even when it comes to money, right? Like, we were born innately abundant. And what happens is in life, we learn stories and that we aren't. And, society has done a great job of limiting, those beliefs within ourselves. But we're just so powerful. And I think that's what I want everyone to know. That's what I'm working on. And I want that for everybody else to just, so like with affirmations, right? One recently I've been working on is like, that I've heard, and I think James Wedmore says this too, is like, you can say commandments, right? Like, you can command things. And I have to ask my inner voice, I was like, inner voice, like, is it really okay to command something? Like, that just sounds so intense and stern. And, that just goes back to the part of me wants to say, like, the lie that, we've been told is that when you command something is mean, or, it's this wrath behind it. But if we are a creator, right, why can't we command something? And just because it's a commandment, it doesn't mean it has to be from a vicious place. It's just, it's coming from a place of like, well, this is who I am. This is what I'm here to do and what I can do. I hope that makes sense.
It makes total sense. And as you're saying that, I heard commanding isn't demanding.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah. So James James talks a lot about the subconscious commandments. And so I do that. I try to practice that. I'll go to bed and I'm like, I will wake up at 5:30 a.m. Little small things, Jack Reacher style, telling myself what time to wake up. But that we are so powerful, and I love that. And I agree. Like, I am so aware of how much I am not tapped in yet to that level, plugged in rather, to that level of power that we have. And we are creators, and we are all that is, and we are part of all that is, which is such a what does Jess say? We are just a drop in the ocean, but we are also the ocean in an entire drop.
Mm-hmm.
Someone says that, something to that effect. Don't quote me, people, but I feel that deeply. And when I read that, what you had said, I'm like, oh, yes. And just you sharing your perspective on that, I think, I always hope that people, when they're listening, they are not just listening from the mind, but they're receiving from that deeper part of themselves. And so when you speak from that, the mind may hear it and say, well, yeah, I know, or well, no, not really. But another part of you, it's like moving through that possibly to your subconscious and creating more of that reality in your life.
Yeah, it's really something you have to experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's when inner voice comes into play. That's where you experience that part of who you are.
And when you just, and then we can kind of wrap it up. I want to be mindful of your time, but talking about experiencing that, when you are leading sessions with your clients, what are you experiencing?
Mm, it's a wide variety. I'm noticing that I intuitively am following my client. So I've gone as deep as felt like I was in a trance state before. Like that, I think that's the deepest I've felt. And then sometimes I'll go into like a meditative state. or sometimes I might not feel anything at all. It kind of really depends on like if my clients really go there, I typically go there with them. And so we'll see, if that is going to be like how every session will be. But oh yeah, and then sometimes I'll see things or I'll hear things. It's getting really I guess like very telepathically connected with my client, psychically connected with them.
Wow, that's so I mean, yes, that's so powerful. And what do like when you're after a session, like what is the biggest change, especially now that you're doing this as more an ongoing, right, versus a one-off session, you're doing more of ongoing work. What types of changes are you seeing in your clients? Like what are they experiencing?
Oh my gosh. So one of them, their inner voice literally gave them their entire business strategy.
Oh my God. Give me inner voice.
I know, right? Like, I think she was doing makeup on the side and literally told her to drop that. And it said, you're going to do this free masterclass on these 3 dates. It told her what she's going to talk about each date. And it basically told her that she's here to transform people from 3D to 5D. Like, it just went into so much detail. And so now she's just really owning that part of herself. And so before, she hid a lot of that. And now it's just stepping into that person completely. So I tend to attract clients that are really transforming themselves in their purpose. And so wanting to lead more purposeful, like soul-led careers and just taking those leaps into those decisions. Um, that's some of the biggest things right now for sure. And I'm sure there's other ones. I just can't think about them off the top of my head, but that's the biggest one to me where I'm just like, holy cow. And then one of my clients literally manifested like $1,500, like right after right after her first session. We did a lot of clearing around stories of like money and childhood. So everyone's different. Everyone's different. I had one client who, let's see, we just had her third session and she started channeling. Um, so that was very unexpected. So, it really just depends on the person, but the results are just, it's really like speechless, honestly. It's like I'm at a loss for words sometimes, a lot of the time.
Wow. I love that. Oh my God. There's so much. I know. There's so much. Oh my gosh. I feel like we could chat about this stuff forever because it is there's so much depth. And I mean, this is like, in a way, kind of scratching the surface of what this all is. And still, I mean, there's so much that we've covered and talked about and just kind of yeah, it's really helpful to hear your perspective of, you're experiencing this in daily life, like every day. You're working with these clients, you're using this in your own life. And that transformation, it's so nice to hear about and to witness from you. So thank you for sharing all of that. Anything else that you want to share that you feel prickle to kind of last words that you want to leave us with?
I don't know why this is coming to my mind. I'm just going to say it. So, are you familiar with Bashar, the channel?
No.
Okay, so he's a very well known channel, kind of like similar to Abraham Hicks, just a different style, I guess you could say.
Okay.
He has a documentary. He's channeled by Daryl Anka. He has a documentary called First Contact, I believe, on Amazon Prime. And so basically, what he said is that channeling is actually the first doorway to having open contact. And I was like, wow, so that's what's happening here. So just so your audience maybe has more understanding to like why channeling and why it's becoming more and more a thing is that I really think this is a big stepping stone to expanding our consciousness and opening ourselves up to other entities and beings that are outside of our planet. So,
Ooh. Okay, I'll put that in the show notes too, and I will obviously be going to watch that this week because that sounds perfect. Yeah, if we don't know what we don't know, and by opening up and experiencing these different realms and these different experiences, it can only help us evolve and shift and enter new realms. Oh my gosh, I should leave it at that. But my inner voice definitely has mentioned me. There's some extraterrestrialness in my past. And I think you had that as well. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I feel, that might be why I feel so drawn to talk about Bashar and all of this is because I was getting that feeling like, say it. So I'm sure your audience, your people are probably also a little extraterrestrial for sure.
I love that. All right. I'm like adding that to my list immediately. Nicole, I so appreciate you and your wisdom. Everyone check her out at metaphysicalme_ on Instagram, metaphysicalme.com. Everything you need is there, and we'll put that in the show notes. And thank you, Nicole, so much for joining us. It was a pleasure to have you on the Tuning In podcast.
Thank you, Dana.
Thank you for joining me on another episode of the Tuning In podcast. As always, if this would resonate with anyone you know, please share the episode. You can follow along with my journey on Instagram at Dana_Evans, or find me on my website at alignful.com.